In the frost-bitten shadows of Midgard's northern reaches, where winter's breath lingered 9 months of the year, a blood oath and the promise of glory brought 6-year-old Leif Ragnarson across treacherous seas to the settlement of Ravnholm. What awaited him wasn't the legendary warrior father who had sent for him, but a field of charred ruins, slaughtered kinsmen, and a lone, one-armed berserker standing amidst the carnage like Tyr himself, bloodied axe still in hand. Alone in a strange land with nothing but the clothes on his back and the small runestone his father had carved for him, Leif's fate seemed sealed by the Norn's cruel threads, until the fearsome warrior known only as Bjorn One-Arm stepped forward from the smoking ruins and knelt before the trembling child. The longship creaked and groaned against the wooden dock as sailors secured the mooring lines. Leif clutched his small sealskin pack against his chest, his knuckles white from the tight grip he'd maintained throughout the final day's journey. The voyage from the settlement in the Orkney Islands had been brutal even by Norse standards. 2 great storms had nearly capsized them, and a third had driven them far off course. The shipmaster, a grizzled man named Halfdan, whose face was as weathered as old leather, approached where Leif stood by the ship's rail. "First journey without your mother, young one?" Halfdan's voice was rough but not unkind as he nodded toward the distant collection of wooden structures that formed the outpost of Ravnholm. "Yes," Leif answered, doing his best to sound brave despite the knot in his stomach. "My father sent for me. He says it's time I learned to be a true Viking." Halfdan's expression changed subtly. "Ragnar the Red? He's your father?" Leif nodded proudly. Everyone knew of Ragnar, one of the most feared and respected warriors in the northern lands. A chieftain who had won his position through courage and cunning rather than birth, Ragnar had spent 3 years establishing this new settlement on the edge of unexplored territories. His last message to Leif's mother had declared the settlement secure enough for his son to finally join him. "He said when I arrived, he would teach me to wield a sword and hunt elk in the great forests," Leif continued, looking toward the settlement with anticipation. "He promised to show me where the forest spirits live and how to track wolves across the snow." Halfdan made a sound that might have been agreement but said nothing more, turning instead to oversee the unloading of trade goods. Leif gathered his courage and his small pack, preparing to disembark. His father had written that he would send someone to meet the ship, but Leif secretly hoped Ragnar himself would be waiting. As the gangplank lowered to the dock, Leif noticed something strange. Despite the ship's arrival, no one had come from the settlement to greet them. No traders eager for goods, no families awaiting news from distant lands. The dock stood empty save for a few seabirds pecking at invisible morsels between the weathered planks. "Something's wrong," muttered one of the sailors beside him. "Ravnholm is never this quiet, especially when a trading ship arrives." Halfdan squinted toward the settlement, his hand moving instinctively to the sword at his hip. "Smoke," he said, grimly. Too much smoke, and not from cooking fires. Now Leif could see it too. Dark plumes rising from several points in the settlement. Not the orderly smoke of hearth fires, but the thick, angry clouds of buildings fully ablaze. "Stay on the ship, boy," Halfdan ordered, but Leif barely heard him. His father was in that settlement. Before anyone could stop him, he had darted down the gangplank and was running along the path that led from the dock to Ravnholm. "Leif, come back!" Halfdan's shout faded behind him as Leif's small legs carried him forward, his heart pounding in his ears. The smell reached him first, acrid smoke mingled with something metallic and sickly sweet that he would later recognize as blood. Then came the silence. No voices, no hammering from the blacksmith's forge, no barking dogs. Only the crackle of flames and the occasional crash as weakened timbers gave way. Leif slowed as he crested the small hill that overlooked the settlement. The sight that greeted him would be seared into his memory until the day he joined his ancestors in Valhalla. Ravnholm was no more. Where a thriving settlement of 40 or 50 sturdy buildings had stood, now only burning ruins remained. Bodies lay scattered in the central square. Men, women, a few children, their final expressions frozen in terror and defiance. Shields were split, swords broken. They had fought hard, but had been overwhelmed. Leif's young mind couldn't fully process what he was seeing. His eyes darted frantically from one fallen warrior to another, searching for his father's distinctive red hair and broad shoulders. His heart rejected what his eyes were telling him, that no one could have survived this slaughter. Then he saw movement among the dead. A massive figure rose from where he had been kneeling beside a fallen warrior. Even at a distance, the man was terrifying to behold. His beard and face were caked with blood, both dried and fresh. His leather armor slashed in numerous places, revealing wounds that should have felled any normal man. Most distinctive was his right arm, or rather the absence of it. The limb ended just below the elbow, the stump wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. In his remaining hand, he gripped a broad-bladed axe that dripped with evidence of recent use. Around him lay 5 bodies that didn't belong to the settlement, warriors in unfamiliar armor decorated with strange symbols. Their wounds were fresh. The one-armed man had apparently been interrupted while performing death rites for the fallen villagers. The stranger's head turned toward Leif, and for an instant, the boy was certain he was looking into the face of death itself. The man's eyes were those of a berserker, wild with battle fury, yet somehow holding something else. Something Leif couldn't name. Instead of charging or throwing his axe, the giant warrior stood perfectly still, regarding the child with an intensity that made Leif want to run back to the ship, but his feet seemed rooted to the ground. Running would change nothing. If his father lay among the dead, what did it matter what became of him? "Are you from the ship?" The warrior's voice was surprisingly quiet for such an imposing figure. Leif nodded mutely. "What is your name, boy?" The giant took a step forward, his movements measured as though trying not to frighten a wild animal. "A Leif?" he managed to whisper. "Leif Ragnarson. I've come to join my father." The warrior's expression changed, a flash of something, recognition, perhaps pity, crossing his blood-streaked features. He planted his axe in the ground and knelt on one knee, bringing himself closer to Leif's height. "Ragnar's son," he said, more to himself than to Leif. Of course. The ship was expected. He studied the boy's face. "You have his look about you." "My father," Leif said, finding his voice again. "Where is he? What happened here?" The one-armed man's jaw tightened. "Raiders from the eastern shores. They came before dawn, while most still slept." His voice was careful, measured. "Your father, Ragnar, led the defense. He fought with the courage of 10 men. Leif felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. "Is he?" "He walks with the All-Father now," the warrior said quietly. "He earned his place in Valhalla many times over this day." The words struck Leif like a physical blow. He had crossed the sea to join a father who was now gone. He had no home to return to. His mother had remarried, and while her new husband wasn't cruel, there was no place for Ragnar's son in their small dwelling. He was alone, truly alone, in a place of death and ashes. Halfdan and 3 armed sailors appeared on the path behind him, weapons drawn as they took in the devastation. "Gods above," Halfdan whispered. "What happened here, Bjorn?" The one-armed warrior, Bjorn, rose to his feet, towering once more. "Raiders. I was hunting in the northern woods. When I returned, it was nearly over." His voice lowered. "I was too late for most." "The boy shouldn't see this," one of the sailors said, gesturing toward Leif. "The boy has already seen everything," Bjorn replied. "He is Ragnar's son." Halfdan's expression softened with understanding. "What will you do with him?" "We could take him back to the Orkneys, though I don't know what awaits him there." "Before?" Bjorn could answer. A sound from the edge of the forest caught everyone's attention. All heads turned to see movement among the trees, the flash of helmets, the glint of weapons. They're coming back, Bjorn growled, pulling his axe from the ground. They always return to ensure no survivors remain. He fixed Halfdan with a hard stare. Take your men back to the ship, now. And the boy? Halfdan asked. Bjorn looked down at Leif, something unreadable passing across his face. Then he turned back to Halfdan. I will protect Ragnar's son with my life. But you must go now if any of you wish to live. Halfdan hesitated only a moment before nodding sharply. May the gods go with you, Bjorn One-Arm. He looked at Leif. And with you, son of Ragnar. As Halfdan and his men retreated toward the dock, Bjorn knelt once more before Leif. I made a promise to your father once, he said, his voice low and urgent. A life debt that can never be repaid, but protecting his son would be a start. He extended his remaining hand. Will you trust me, Leif Ragnarson? I cannot promise safety, but I swear by all 9 worlds that no harm will come to you while I draw breath. Leif looked into the warrior's fierce eyes. Behind the battle fury and grief, he saw something unexpected. Honor, determination, perhaps even kindness. This was the last connection to his father, a warrior who had fought alongside. Ragnar, he placed his small hand in Bjorn's massive one. I will trust you. Bjorn nodded once, then straightened to his full, imposing height. Then let us show these eastern dogs what happens when they face a berserker protecting his kin. Bjorn moved with surprising speed for a man his size, guiding Leif toward the remnants of a storage cellar whose entrance was partially hidden by fallen debris. The heavy wooden doors lay at an angle, one hinge broken but providing enough cover to conceal a small boy. Stay here, Bjorn commanded, his voice, leaving no room for argument. Do not move, do not make a sound, no matter what you hear or see. Do you understand? Leif nodded, his throat too tight with fear to speak. Bjorn studied him for a moment, then reached to his belt and removed a small knife with intricate carvings on the handle. Take this, he said, pressing it into Leif's palm. A warrior should never be without a weapon. Use it only if someone other than me opens these doors. Leif clutched the knife, the weight of it unfamiliar but somehow comforting. Bjorn pulled the cellar doors nearly closed, arranging the debris to make the entrance appear undisturbed. Through a small gap between the doors, Leif watched as Bjorn melted into the shadows of a half-collapsed building across the village center. The warrior moved with a silence that seemed impossible for his massive frame, positioning himself where he would have clear sight of the approaching raiders. They came minutes later, 8 warriors clad in dark leathers with strange spiral patterns, painted on their shields. They moved with the confidence of men who expected no resistance, spreading out to check the ruins for survivors or valuables missed in their first attack. Their language was harsh and guttural, unlike any Leif had heard before. Not Norse, not Saxon, something from farther east. The raiders methodically checked each burning structure, occasionally dragging out bodies to strip them of weapons, jewelry, or anything else of value. 2 of them began moving toward Leif's hiding place, kicking through the rubble with casual cruelty. The boy gripped Bjorn's knife tighter, his small hands slick with sweat. Would he have the courage to use it if discovered? A sudden war cry shattered the raiders' complacency. Bjorn erupted from his hiding place like a storm given human form, his axe already in mid-swing as he engaged the nearest 2 eastern warriors. The first died before he could raise his shield, the axe cleaving through his shoulder and deep into his chest. The second managed to block the backswing but was unprepared for Bjorn's follow-up, a vicious headbutt that cracked the raider's nose and sent him stumbling backward. What happened next would later be sung about in the great mead halls of the North. 1 against 6, a one-armed berserker defending a child not his own against warriors who had already slaughtered an entire settlement. Bjorn fought like a man possessed by battle spirits. His axe became a blur of lethal motion, never still, never predictable. He used his missing arm to his advantage, turning what should have been a weakness into a strength, raiders who tried to attack his seemingly vulnerable right side, found themselves drawn into a deadly trap, meeting either his axe or a powerful kick that shattered knees and ribs. 3 raiders fell in the first furious exchange. The remaining 3 spread out, trying to surround the Berserker. Their confidence had evaporated, replaced by wary respect and growing fear. They attacked simultaneously from different angles. Bjorn roared, a sound so primal it sent birds scattering. From nearby trees, the Berserker rage took him fully, his movements becoming faster, stronger, immune to pain. He took a spear thrust to his thigh without flinching, severing the spear shaft with his axe before burying the weapon in its owner's skull. The 5th raider managed to slice Bjorn's back with a sword before losing his head to the backswing. Though, last Eastern warrior, seeing his companions dead, turned to flee, but made it only 3 steps before Bjorn's thrown axe caught him between the shoulder blades. Silence fell over the ruins once more, broken only by Bjorn's labored breathing as the Berserker fury slowly receded. He retrieved his axe and methodically checked each fallen raider, ensuring none would rise again. Only then did he return to the cellar doors, his massive frame blocking the light as he pulled them open. "It's safe now," he said, extending his blood-covered hand to help Leif climb out. The boy emerged, still clutching the knife, his eyes wide as he took in the fresh carnage around them. "You killed them all," he whispered, a mixture of awe and fear in his voice. "They deserved worse," Bjorn replied simply. "They were Folkvi raiders. They don't just kill for plunder, they sacrifice captives to their gods. Your father's settlement wasn't the first they've destroyed, but I've made certain it will be their last." Bjorn suddenly grimaced, his hand going to the wound in his thigh. Now that the battle fury had passed, his injuries were making themselves known. Blood soaked his leathers in several places. "You're hurt," Leif said, stating the obvious as children often do. Bjorn grunted. "Nothing that will kill me. I've had worse." He glanced at the westering sun. "But we cannot stay here. There will be more. The Folkvi always hunt in larger packs than this." "Where will we go?" Leif asked, suddenly remembering that he had nowhere in this land to call home. Bjorn considered this for a moment. "First, we must honor the dead. Then we head north to the mountains. I have a shelter there." The honoring consisted of laying out the bodies of the fallen settlement folk with as much dignity as possible. Bjorn instructed Leif to collect stones for cairns while he arranged the dead. The boy was grateful for the task. It kept his mind occupied and his eyes away from the gruesome work Bjorn was doing. "What about my father?" Leif asked as they worked. "Which one is he?" Bjorn paused, his single hand resting on the shoulder of a fallen warrior. "He is already honored, young Ragnarson. When I arrived during the attack, your father was still fighting despite mortal wounds. He saved 3 children by holding the eastern gate alone against 4 raiders. When he fell, I carried him to the shore and sent him to Valhalla in the proper way, with fire and prayers to the All-Father." Leif felt tears burn his eyes but fought them back. Vikings did not weep openly, especially the sons of great warriors, like Ragnar. Did he speak of me before he died?" Bjorn's expression softened slightly. "He did. His last words were a plea to protect you when you arrived. He knew the ship was due soon." He studied the boy's face. "He said you had the heart of a wolf and the body of a cub, and that one day you would bring honor to his name in ways he could not imagine." Fresh grief washed over Leif, but beneath it stirred something else. Pride that his father's final thoughts had been of him, that Ragnar had believed in his son's future even as his own ended. He straightened his shoulders and continued gathering stones with renewed purpose. By nightfall, they had built simple cairns for as many of the dead as they could identify. Bjorn had fashioned crude torches from broken furniture and pitch, using them to light a central pyre for those too damaged to be properly laid out. As the flames climbed toward the darkening sky, he spoke the traditional words for the fallen, commending their spirits to the gods. Leif watched, memorizing the ritual. Someday, he promised himself, he would return here and build proper memorials for each person who had died, especially for his father. He would learn their names from Bjorn and carve them into stone markers that would stand for generations. "We should go," Bjorn said when the pyre was burning steadily. "Gather anything useful you can find. Food, water skins, warm clothing. The journey to the mountains will not be easy." They salvaged what they could from the ruins, dried meat from a smokehouse that had escaped the worst of the flames, 2 water skins, a small cooking pot, and a cloak that Bjorn cut down to fit Leif's smaller frame. The warrior bound his own wounds with strips torn from a clean linen shirt found in the remains of what must have been the weaver's hut. "What about weapons?" Leif asked, still holding the knife Bjorn had given him. "I have mine," Bjorn replied, patting his axe. "And you have yours. We'll find you something more suitable when you're ready to learn." He surveyed their meager supplies. "This will have to do. We move now, while we still have some light." They set off into the gathering darkness, Bjorn setting a pace that challenged Leif's shorter legs, but never quite outstripped them. The warrior seemed to have an instinctive sense of what the boy could manage, pushing him to his limits without breaking him. When they reached the edge of the forest, Bjorn paused to look back at the burning settlement, his face unreadable in the fading light. "I promised your father I would protect you," he said quietly. "But there is something you should know before we go further." He turned to face Leif fully. "The raiders who destroyed Ravnholm were hunting me. Your father's settlement was destroyed because I had stayed there a fortnight ago while recovering from wounds." Leif's confusion must have shown on his face, because Bjorn continued. "The Folkvi have placed a blood price on my head. 3 winters ago, I slaughtered a dozen of their priests when I discovered the abominations they were performing with captive children. They believe that killing me will please their dark gods." "So, my father died because of you?" Leif struggled to understand, grief and confusion warring within him. Bjorn knelt, meeting the boy's eyes. "Your father died because evil men do evil things. But yes, they would not have come to Ravnholm had I not rested there. Ragnar knew the risk when he offered me shelter. I warned him of what might follow me. He said any man who protected children at the risk of his own life was welcome at his hearth." He paused. "I owe him a debt that can never be repaid. But you should understand that traveling with me carries danger. The Volkvi will not stop hunting us." Leif absorbed this, his young mind grappling with complex moral questions no child should face. Finally, he asked, "These Volkvi, they hurt children?" "Yes," Bjorn answered simply, not softening the truth. "They believe the blood and suffering of the innocent gives them power." "And you stopped them?" "Some of them. Not enough." Leif considered this, then squared his small shoulders. "Then my father was right to help you, and I will go with you." He gripped the knife tighter. "And someday, I will help you fight them too." Something flickered in Bjorn's eyes, surprise, perhaps respect. He nodded once. "First you must learn to survive, then to fight, then perhaps to win." He rose to his feet. "The mountains are still far. Can you continue?" Leif nodded, determination replacing fear. He had lost everything: his father, his future, the life he had imagined in the new settlement. But he had found something too: purpose, and a guardian whose protection came with a noble cause. "I'm ready," he said. As they disappeared into the dark forest, neither saw the raven that circled 3 times over the burning remains of Ravnholm before winging northward, following their path into the wilderness. The Allfather was watching, and the threads of fate had begun to weave a new pattern around the last child of Ravnholm and his one-armed protector. The forest closed around them, ancient pines towering overhead, their branches blocking what little moonlight filtered through the cloudy sky. Bjorn moved with the confidence of one who knew these woods intimately, occasionally stopping to check their back trail or to listen to the night sounds around them. Leif struggled to keep up, his city-raised legs unused to navigating forest undergrowth. Twice he stumbled over exposed roots, and once he nearly walked into a low-hanging branch that Bjorn had ducked under without comment. The Berserker noticed the boy's difficulty but said nothing. The wilderness would teach its own lessons. After what felt like hours, they reached a small stream cutting through the forest floor. Bjorn held up his hand, signaling a stop. "We'll rest here briefly," he said, kneeling to fill their water skins. "Drink, but not too much at once." Leif gratefully sank onto a moss-covered rock, his legs trembling with exhaustion. He sipped the cold stream water, feeling it revive him somewhat. "How much farther?" he dared to ask. "We'll not reach the mountains before dawn," Bjorn replied. "There's a hunting shelter half a day's journey from here. We'll rest there tomorrow, then continue when you've recovered your strength." The casual acknowledgement that they would need to adjust their pace for his benefit made Leif flush with shame. "I won't slow you down," he promised. "I can keep going as long as needed." Bjorn's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "There's no dishonor in admitting your limits, boy. The strongest oak knows when to bend with the wind rather than break by standing rigid." It was the longest speech Leif had heard from the warrior, and something in the words reminded him of his father. Ragnar, too, had valued wisdom alongside strength. Perhaps this Bjorn was not so different, despite his fearsome appearance. "Were you and my father friends?" Leif asked, seizing the momentary calm. Bjorn seemed to consider the question carefully. "Not friends," he finally said. "But we respected each other. We fought side by side once, 2 winters ago, when wolf raiders attacked a fishing village where we both happened to be trading. A man reveals his true nature in battle, and your father's was honorable. How did you lose your arm?" The question slipped out before Leif could consider its rudeness. Instead of anger, Bjorn's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Curious little raven, aren't you? I lost it to a Volkvi priest king whose sacrificial altar I destroyed. His blade was poisoned. The wound wouldn't heal properly. I cut it off myself rather than let the rot spread." Leif's eyes widened. "You cut off your own arm? Would you rather another did it?" Bjorn shrugged as if discussing the weather rather than self-amputation. "A warrior does what must be done. The arm was already dead. I simply separated it from the rest of me that wished to live." Before Leif could ask another question, Bjorn stiffened, his head turning sharply toward the way they had come. "Silence," he hissed, reaching for his axe. Leif froze, straining his ears. At first, he heard nothing beyond the gentle burble of the stream and the rustle of night wind through pine needles. Then he caught it. Voices, distant but approaching. Men speaking in the same harsh, unfamiliar tongue as the raiders who had attacked Ravnholm. "Volkvi hunters," Bjorn breathed, so quietly Leif barely heard him. "They're tracking us faster than I expected." He surveyed their surroundings with a warrior's calculating eye. "We can't outrun them, not with your shorter legs, and not with my wounds slowing me." "What will we do?" Leif whispered, fear clutching at his throat. Bjorn's expression hardened into grim resolve. "We'll use the stream to hide our scent and tracks, then we find a defensible position." He looked down at Leif. "I won't lie to you, boy. The odds aren't in our favor. There are at least a dozen of them from the sound of it." "You killed 6 by yourself earlier," Leif pointed out. "That was in daylight. On ground I chose, against men who weren't expecting resistance," Bjorn countered. "Night fighting in the forest against prepared hunters is different." He studied the boy's face. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," Leif admitted, seeing no point in lying. "But my father wouldn't run, so neither will I." Something like approval flickered across Bjorn's face. "Your father would want you to live. There's no valor in dying needlessly when you've barely begun to live. He looked upstream. We'll follow the water as far as we can, then find high ground. If we must fight, we'll make them pay dearly for every step. They set off immediately, wading through the shallow stream to avoid leaving tracks on the soft forest floor. The cold water numbed Leif's feet through his leather boots, but he made no complaint. Bjorn moved with purpose, occasionally helping the boy over deeper sections or around slippery rocks. The voices behind them grew louder, then fainter as the stream curved through the forest. Twice they heard horns being blown, signals between hunting parties, Bjorn explained in a whisper. The Volkvi were coordinating their search, closing a net around their prey. After nearly an hour of following the stream, Bjorn led them out onto a rocky bank where they would leave no footprints. Ahead, the ground rose toward a ridge of weathered stone outcroppings that would provide some natural defense. Stay close, Bjorn instructed as they began the climb. Step only where I step. The ascent was arduous, especially for Leif's tired legs, but fear provided new reserves of energy. They reached the rocky ridge just as the moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting silver light across the forest below. From their elevated position, they could see torchlights moving through the trees, at least 3 separate groups of hunters converging on the stream they had followed. Bjorn guided Leif to a natural hollow formed by 3 large boulders. It offered protection on 3 sides, with a narrow approach that could be defended by a single warrior. Rest while you can, Bjorn told him, arranging their meager supplies in the hollow. I'll keep watch. Despite his exhaustion, sleep seemed impossible with danger so close. Leif watched as Bjorn examined his axe edge, then positioned himself where he could observe the forest below while remaining mostly hidden himself. Will they find us? Leif asked after a long silence. Bjorn didn't turn. Eventually, the question is whether they find us before dawn. In daylight, our position is stronger. He glanced back at the boy. Try to sleep, Ragnarson. Tomorrow may require all your strength. Before we continue this saga of survival against impossible odds, we want to hear from you, our loyal shield brothers and shield maidens. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, whether you're from the icy reaches of the north like our Viking ancestors, or from warmer southern shores. Are you seeing echoes of the ancient Norse spirit in young Leif's determination to survive despite overwhelming challenges? If this tale of a one-armed berserker defending the last survivor of a massacre resonates with your warrior spirit, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Tomorrow's video will reveal how Bjorn earned his fearsome reputation among the Volkvi, and what dark secrets lie in his past that might either save or doom young Leif. Now, let us return to the rocky ridge where our unlikely pair awaits the approaching danger. Leif tried to sleep as Bjorn had commanded, but his mind raced with images of burning buildings and fallen warriors. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw his father as he imagined him in his final battle, standing alone against multiple foes, fighting to save others even as his life ebbed away. Would he ever be capable of such courage? Such sacrifice? A soft sound from Bjorn's direction pulled Leif from his troubled thoughts. The massive warrior was checking his wounds, probing the spear injury in his thigh, with a grimace that he couldn't entirely suppress. The bandages he'd fashioned earlier were soaked through with blood, appearing black in the dim moonlight. You need better bandages, Leif whispered, sitting up. Bjorn glanced back at him, his expression unreadable. I told you to rest. I can't. Sleep, Leif admitted. He hesitated, then added, My mother was a healer before she remarried. She taught me a few things. He reached for his small pack and removed a pouch carefully wrapped in oiled cloth. I have herbs. She gave them to me for the journey in case I became ill. Bjorn's eyebrow raised slightly. A warrior who knows healing herbs? That's uncommon. My father always said a warrior who can heal himself lives to fight another day, Leif replied, echoing Ragnar's words from years of bedtime stories. A ghost of a smile flickered across Bjorn's face. Your father was wiser than most. He studied the boy for a moment, then nodded. Very well, young healer. Show me what you can do. Leif approached cautiously, still somewhat intimidated by the berserker despite their shared ordeal. He unwrapped his herb pouch and removed several small bundles of dried plants, each tied with colored thread to distinguish them. I need clean water, he said with growing confidence, and fresh bandages. Bjorn handed him a water skin and tore more strips from his already shredded tunic. Leif worked with the focused concentration of a child determined to prove himself, crushing yarrow leaves between two smooth stones he found nearby, then mixing them with a small amount of water to form a paste. This will help stop the bleeding, he explained as he applied the mixture to Bjorn's thigh wound. And this, he held up another herb bundle, is thyme. Mother says it keeps wounds from festering. Bjorn watched with unexpected patience as the boy treated each of his injuries in turn, his small hands working carefully but effectively. When Leif finished wrapping the fresh bandages, the warrior tested his leg, putting weight on it experimentally. Good work, he said simply. Your mother taught you well. Leif beamed with pride at the rare compliment. She said I had a healer's touch, like her father before her. A valuable skill, Bjorn agreed. Perhaps more valuable than swinging an axe, though few warriors would admit it. He turned back to his watch position, but added, Now truly, get some rest. Dawn is still ours. Away, and you'll need your strength. This time, exhaustion overcame anxiety, and Leif drifted into fitful sleep. His dreams were a chaotic jumble of burning buildings, his father's voice, and the terrifying visage of Bjorn in berserker rage, standing like a lone wolf against a pack of jackals. He awoke to Bjorn's hand on his shoulder, the warrior's grip firm but not painful. The sky had lightened just enough to distinguish shapes in the pre-dawn gloom. Bjorn's finger went to his lips, signaling silence, then pointed downslope. Leif peered carefully over the edge of their rocky shelter. A chill ran through him at the sight below. At least 15 warriors were spread through the forest edge, their torches extinguished now as they prepared for the coming dawn. They moved with disciplined precision, establishing a perimeter and positioning scouts at strategic points. These were not common raiders, but trained hunters. They've surrounded the ridge, Bjorn whispered, his mouth close to Leif's ear. They know we're up here somewhere. When full light comes, they'll begin sweeping upward. Can we fight them? Leif asked, already knowing the answer. Bjorn's expression was grim. Not 15. Not with you to protect and my wounds slowing me. He surveyed their position one more time, his warrior's mind calculating odds and options. We need a distraction, something to draw most of them away. He reached into a small pouch at his belt and withdrew several items. A striker for making fire, a small carved whistle made from bone, and a leather thong with what looked like bear claws threaded onto it. Listen carefully, he said, fixing Leif with an intense gaze. When I leave, you will stay hidden. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, you do not move from this shelter until the sun is directly overhead. Do you understand? You're leaving me? Leif couldn't keep the fear from his voice. I'm creating a path for your escape, Bjorn corrected. I'll lead them away from here, northwest toward the deep forest. When the sun is at its peak, you will go east, following the ridge until you reach a tall standing stone shaped like a spear point. From there, head north until you find a river. Follow it upstream, and you'll reach a waterfall with a cave behind it. Wait for me there. But what if you don't come? The question slipped out before Leif could stop it. Bjorn's expression remained unchanged. Then you will find supplies in the cave, enough to last until you can reach the coastal settlement. 3 days' journey east. Ask for Freydis the shipwright. Give her this. He removed a small iron pendant from around his neck, shaped like Thor's hammer. She'll see you safely back to your mother. The finality in Bjorn's voice made Leif's chest tighten with fear and an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I want to go. With you," he insisted. "I can help." "You help by surviving," Bjorn said firmly. "Your father died to give his people a chance to live. Honor his sacrifice by living, Leif Ragnarson." He placed the Thor's hammer pendant around the boy's neck. "Besides, I move faster alone. These Volkvi have hunted me for 3 winters without success. Today will be no different." Before Leif could protest further, Bjorn adjusted his axe harness and checked his knife. "Remember, sun at its highest point, then east to the standing stone, north to the river, upstream to the waterfall. Repeat it. Sun highest, east to standing stone, north to river, upstream to waterfall," Leif recited dutifully. Bjorn nodded once, satisfied. "Good. Now give me your cloak." Confused, Leif removed the 2 large cloak Bjorn had salvaged for him from Ravnholm. The warrior took it and tore a strip from the bottom, securing it to his belt where it would be visible. "So they'll know it's you they chase, not just any forest traveler," Leif realized. Again, that ghost of a smile touched Bjorn's lips. "You have your father's quick mind as well as his stubborn spirit." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "You did well last night. The herbs helped. A warrior remembers those who aid him in battle." Without waiting for a response, Bjorn slipped away, moving with that impossible silence that seemed at odds with his massive frame. Within seconds, he had vanished into the pre-dawn shadows, leaving Leif alone in the rocky shelter with nothing but a knife, a pendant, and a set of directions he repeated to himself like a prayer. The wait was agonizing. As dawn broke fully across the forest, Leif watched the Volkvi hunters begin their methodical sweep of the ridge. They moved upward from different angles, communicating with low whistles that mimicked forest birds. Their search pattern would have found the rocky shelter within an hour. Then came the sound of Bjorn's bone whistle from the northwest edge of the ridge. 3 sharp blasts that sounded nothing like any natural creature. The hunting party froze, heads turning in unison toward the sound. A moment later, a ball of flame arced through the early morning air, landing among dry undergrowth at the forest edge. Fire bloomed instantly, sending thick smoke billowing upward. The Volkvi leader barked orders, gesturing sharply. Most of the hunters abandoned their upward sweep and raced toward the fire and the whistle. 3 remained behind, continuing their search of the ridge. Leif pressed himself deeper into the rocky crevice, trying to make his small body even smaller. His heart pounded so loudly he was certain they would hear it. From the northwest came the distinctive roar of Bjorn entering Berserker rage, followed by shouts of surprise and pain. The 3 remaining hunters hesitated, clearly torn between continuing their assigned search and joining what sounded like a significant battle. When another roar echoed across the distance, even more terrifying than the first, their leader made a decision. 2 would continue searching, 1 would reinforce the main group. Leif watched through a tiny gap as the Volkvi leader disappeared downslope, leaving 2 hunters to methodically check each potential hiding place along the ridge. It would be only minutes before they discovered his shelter. The distant sounds of battle intensified, metal clashing against metal, men shouting in that harsh eastern tongue, and occasionally Bjorn's berserker roar rising above it all. Then, abruptly, silence fell. The 2 remaining hunters exchanged glances, clearly unsettled by the sudden quiet. One called out something in their language. No response came. He called again, more urgently. Still nothing. The hunters conferred briefly, then one pointed in a direction away from where Leif was hiding. They nodded in agreement and moved off, abandoning their search of the immediate area. Leif realized they must have spotted something, or thought they had, that suggested their quarry had already fled the ridge. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. A piercing scream cut through the morning air from the direction. The main hunting party had gone. It wasn't Bjorn's voice, it was one of the hunters. More shouts followed, tinged with unmistakable fear. Then silence again, more absolute than before. Leif waited, scarcely daring to breathe. The sun continued its slow climb into the sky. Minutes stretched into an hour, then longer. No hunters returned to the ridge. No further sounds of battle reached his ears. Had Bjorn somehow defeated them all? Or had they killed him and were now pursuing some false trail, leaving Leif temporarily forgotten? The boy remembered Bjorn's instructions. Wait until the sun was directly overhead, not a moment before. He settled in, watching the sun's progress with anxious impatience. By mid-morning, birds had returned to the forest, their songs suggesting the danger had passed from their immediate vicinity. A small red squirrel even ventured near Leif's hiding place, regarding him with bright, curious eyes before scampering away. As the sun neared its zenith, Leif prepared to move. He checked that the Thor's hammer pendant was secure around his neck, ensured Bjorn's knife was safely in his belt, and gathered what few supplies they had brought to the ridge. He repeated the directions once more: east to the standing stone, north to the river, upstream to the waterfall. When the sun finally reached its highest point, Leif emerged cautiously from the rocky shelter. The ridge seemed deserted, with no sign of the Volkvi hunters. He moved eastward as instructed, staying low and using the rocky outcroppings as cover. The standing stone was easier to find than he expected, a tall, weathered monolith that indeed resembled a spear point thrusting up from the ridge's eastern edge. From there, the northern path led down a gentler slope, through a meadow of tall grass where Leif moved carefully to avoid leaving an obvious trail. He reached the river by early afternoon, a swift, clear current flowing between mossy banks. Upstream, Bjorn had said. Leif turned west, following the watercourse. The going was easier here, with the riverbank providing a natural path. Still, he remained vigilant, pausing frequently to listen for pursuers. The waterfall announced itself, long before he saw it, a distant rushing sound that grew steadily louder as he approached. When he finally rounded a bend in the river and caught sight of it, Leif stopped in momentary awe. The water cascaded at least 30 feet from a rocky ledge above, creating a curtain of white foam that thundered into a deep pool below. Behind the waterfall, just as Bjorn had promised, a dark opening was visible, the cave entrance, partially hidden by the falling water. Reaching it would mean getting wet, but after everything he'd endured, a little water hardly seemed worth worrying about. Leif picked his way carefully along the slippery rocks at the pool's edge until he reached a point where he could dart behind the waterfall with minimal exposure to the falling torrent. Even so, he was soaked through by the time he stumbled into the cave entrance, water dripping from his hair and clothes. The cave was larger than it appeared from outside. Its entrance narrowed to a short passage that opened into a spacious chamber with a surprisingly dry floor. As his eyes adjusted to the dimmer light, Leif saw that this was no natural shelter, but a carefully maintained refuge. A stone fire pit occupied the center, surrounded by flat rocks for sitting. Dried wood was stacked neatly against one wall. A wooden shelf held pottery jars sealed with wax, a small cauldron, and various tools. Furs and blankets were folded on a raised sleeping platform. Hanging from a peg driven into the rock wall was a small bow and a quiver of arrows sized for a child not much larger than Leif himself. This was no temporary shelter, but a home of sorts. Bjorn's home? It seemed too small for the massive Berserker, yet the evidence of careful preparation was everywhere. Leif found flint and steel beside the fire pit and soon had a small fire burning, its smoke drawn upward through a natural chimney in the cave ceiling. He changed into dry clothes from his pack and hung his wet garments near the fire to dry. Then he examined the sealed jars, finding dried meat, berries, and nuts, enough food to last many days if used sparingly. As the afternoon wore on, Leif's initial relief at finding sanctuary gradually gave way to worry. Bjorn should have reached the cave by now if he had successfully eluded or defeated the hunters. His absence suggested something had gone wrong. Leif moved to the cave entrance, peering through the waterfall's misty veil. The forest beyond showed no signs of disturbance. No Volkvi hunters searching the riverbank. No one-armed berserker making his way upstream. A hollow feeling settled in Leif's stomach. Bjorn had known this might happen. That's why he'd given such specific instructions, why he'd provided the pendant for Freydis the shipwright. He had always known he might not return. Leif fingered the Thor's hammer hanging around his neck. 3 days' journey east to the coastal settlement, Bjorn had said. But east would take him away from Ravnholm, away from where his father had died. Away from where Bjorn might still be fighting, or captured. A warrior does what must be done, Bjorn had said of cutting off his own arm. What must Leif do now? Follow instructions and head east to safety? Or, the alternative was almost too frightening to contemplate, return to the ridge. Try to track what had happened. Perhaps even find Bjorn if he was wounded rather than dead. It would mean facing dangers no 6-year-old should encounter alone. Yet something in him rebelled at the thought of running to safety, while the man who had protected him might be suffering. Bjorn had put himself at risk to create a diversion, to give Leif a chance to escape. Could he do less in return? As dusk approached, Leif made his decision. He would wait until morning. If Bjorn hadn't appeared by then, he would gather supplies from the cave and backtrack to the ridge. Not to fight. He wasn't fool enough to think he could take on Folkvi warriors, but to observe, to learn what had happened. And if Bjorn lived, but was injured or captured, to find help somehow. It wasn't the safe choice. It wasn't what Bjorn had instructed. But as Leif settled onto the sleeping platform, wrapped in furs against the evening chill, he felt it was what his father would have done. The heart of a wolf in the body of a cub, his father had said of him. Perhaps it was time to prove those words true. Leif picked his way carefully along the slippery rocks at the pool's edge until he reached a point where he could dart behind the waterfall with minimal exposure to the falling torrent. Even so, he was soaked through by the time he stumbled into the cave entrance, water dripping from his hair and clothes. The cave was larger than it appeared from outside. Its entrance narrowed to a short passage that opened into a spacious chamber with a surprisingly dry floor. As his eyes adjusted to the dimmer light, Leif saw that this was no natural shelter, but a carefully maintained refuge. A stone fire pit occupied the center, surrounded by flat rocks for sitting. Dried wood was stacked neatly against one wall. A wooden shelf held pottery jars sealed with wax, a small cauldron, and various tools. Furs and blankets were folded on a raised sleeping platform. Hanging from a peg driven into the rock wall was a small bow and a quiver of arrows sized for a child not much larger than Leif himself. This was no temporary shelter, but a home of sorts. Bjorn's home? It seemed too small for the massive berserker, yet the evidence of careful preparation was everywhere. Leif found flint and steel beside the fire pit, and soon had a small fire burning, its smoke drawn upward through a natural chimney in the cave ceiling. He changed into dry clothes from his pack and hung his wet garments near the fire to dry. Then he examined the sealed jars, finding dried meat, berries, and nuts. Enough food to last many days if used sparingly. As the afternoon wore on, Leif's initial relief at finding sanctuary gradually gave way to worry. Bjorn should have reached the cave by now if he had successfully eluded or defeated the hunters. His absence suggested something had gone wrong. Leif moved to the cave entrance, peering through the waterfall's misty veil. The forest beyond showed no signs of disturbance. No Volkvi hunters searching the riverbank. No one-armed berserker making his way upstream. A hollow feeling settled in Leif's stomach. Bjorn had known this might happen. That's why he'd given such specific instructions, why he'd provided the pendant for Freydis the shipwright. He had always known he might not return. Leif fingered the Thor's hammer hanging around his neck. 3 days' journey east to the coastal settlement, Bjorn had said. But east would take him away from Ravnholm, away from where his father had died. Away from where Bjorn might still be fighting or captured. A warrior does what must be done, Bjorn had said of cutting off his own arm. What must Leif do now? Follow instructions and head east to safety? Or, the alternative was almost too frightening to contemplate. Return to the ridge. Try to track what had happened. Perhaps even find Bjorn if he was wounded rather than dead. It would mean facing dangers no 6-year-old should encounter alone. Yet something in him rebelled at the thought of running to safety, while the man who had protected him might be suffering. Bjorn had put himself at risk to create a diversion, to give Leif a chance to escape. Could he do less in return? As dusk approached, Leif made his decision. He would wait until morning. If Bjorn hadn't appeared by then, he would gather supplies from the cave and backtrack to the ridge. Not to fight. He wasn't fool enough to think he could take on Volkvi warriors, but to observe, to learn what had happened. And if Bjorn lived, but was injured or captured, to find help somehow. It wasn't the safe choice. It wasn't what Bjorn had instructed. But as Leif settled onto the sleeping platform, wrapped in furs against the evening chill, he felt it was what his father would have done. The heart of a wolf in the body of a cub, his father had said of him. Perhaps it was time to prove those words true. Outside the cave, as darkness settled over the forest, a raven perched on a branch overlooking the waterfall. It watched the cave entrance with an intelligence that seemed more than animal, its head tilting as if listening to thoughts rather than sounds. After a long moment, it spread its wings and launched into the night sky, flying northwest, back toward the ridge where a one-armed berserker had made his stand against overwhelming odds, and where the threads of fate continued to weave their pattern around the last child of Ravnholm. Morning light filtered through, the waterfall's misty curtain casting dancing patterns across the cave walls. Leif had slept fitfully, waking often to listen for sounds of Bjorn's return. But the night had brought only the constant rush of falling water and occasional calls of night birds. The boy sat cross-legged by the remains of his fire, chewing a strip of dried venison from one of the sealed jars. The meat was tough but flavorful, seasoned with herbs he couldn't identify. As he ate, Leif considered his options with a seriousness that belied his young age. Bjorn's instructions had been clear. Wait at the cave, then travel east to the coastal settlement if he didn't return. The sensible choice, the safe choice. Yet the path that pulled at Leif's heart led back to the ridge, back toward danger. He fingered the Thor's hammer pendant, its iron surface cool against his skin. What would his father have done? Ragnar the Red had been known for his courage, but also for his wisdom. Would he have risked his life on a fool's errand, or accepted that some battles cannot be won? A sudden movement at the cave entrance scattered his thoughts. Leif's hand went to Bjorn's knife, his body tensing for danger. But it was only a raven, perched improbably on a rock ledge beside the waterfall. The bird seemed unnaturally large, its black feathers gleaming with blue-purple iridescence in the morning light. It regarded Leif with an intelligence that seemed almost deliberate. Then, with a harsh croak that somehow carried over the waterfall's roar, it launched itself into flight, disappearing through the curtain of water. Leif moved to the cave entrance, peering out cautiously. The raven circled above the pool, then flew upstream, the direction Leif would need to travel to return. To the ridge. It landed on a branch, looking back as if waiting. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air passed through the boy. Ravens were Odin's birds, carriers of the Allfather's attention. Was this a sign? His father had often said that brave men made their own fate, but even the bravest recognized the gods' messages when they appeared. Decision crystallized in Leif's mind. He would return to the ridge, not recklessly but carefully as a scout rather than a warrior. If Bjorn lived and needed help, Leif would find a way to provide it. If Bjorn had fallen, he deserved proper death rites from someone who had witnessed his courage. Moving quickly but methodically, Leif gathered supplies from the cave. He filled a small pouch with dried meat and berries, secured his water skin, and collected his now dry original clothing as an extra layer against the morning chill. After brief consideration, he took the child-sized bow and a half-dozen arrows from the wall peg. Bjorn had said nothing about the bow, but it seemed meant for someone of Leif's size. Perhaps it had been intended as a gift for him, or for another child who never arrived. The weapon was simple but well-crafted, its pull just within Leif's strength. He had received basic archery instruction from his mother's new husband, who had seen the value in teaching the boy practical skills despite having no blood connection to him. Leif was no marksman, but he could hit a target the size of a shield, at 20 paces. It might make the difference between eating and going hungry if his journey stretched longer than expected. Leaving the cave meant getting wet again, but Leif had devised a plan during his sleepless night. He wrapped his supplies in one of the waterproof hides from the sleeping platform, securing it tightly with lengths of sinew he found on the shelf. The resulting bundle he strapped to his back, leaving his hands free for the treacherous crossing, behind the waterfall. With a final glance around the cave that had sheltered him, Leif muttered a quick prayer to Thor for strength and stepped into the narrow passage leading to the outside world. The water's roar grew deafening as he approached. The exit. Taking a deep breath, he darted through the silver curtain of water, his feet finding purchase on the slick rocks with a sure-footedness born of necessity rather than experience. Despite his precautions, he emerged on the far side half-soaked and gasping. The raven still perched on the branch upstream, watching his progress with that unnerving intelligence. When Leif had regained his balance and adjusted his pack, the bird took flight again, moving further upstream but still within sight. "I see you, Hugin?" "Or perhaps Munin," Leif murmured, remembering the names of Odin's thought and memory ravens from his father's tales. "If you're leading me to Bjorn, I follow willingly. If you're leading me to my death—" He hesitated, then squared his small shoulders. "Then I'll greet it as my father would have, with honor." The journey back was harder than Leif anticipated. Following the river meant navigating treacherous banks where tree roots created natural snares for unwary feet. Several times he was forced away from the water's edge by impassable terrain, requiring careful tracking to find his way back to the river. Always the raven remained just ahead, appearing whenever Leif seemed uncertain of his path. By midday, he had reached the meadow of tall grass he'd crossed the previous day. Here he moved with extra caution, knowing his small figure would be visible to any watching eyes. The standing stone loomed ahead, marking the path back to the ridge where Bjorn had made his stand against the Volkvi hunters. Leif paused at the stone's base, catching his breath and surveying the ridge that rose before him. From this distance, he could see no movement, no sign of either Bjorn or the hunters. The forest below the ridge showed signs of disturbance, broken branches and trampled undergrowth where men had run in pursuit of Bjorn's diversion. Following that trail would be the most direct route, but also the most dangerous if any Volkvi remained. Leif opted instead for a more circuitous approach, skirting the edge of the forest and using the terrain for cover. The raven seemed to approve, flying a similar route slightly ahead of him. The sun had begun its westward descent when Leif finally reached a vantage point allowing him to see the northwestern slope where Bjorn had led the hunters. What he saw made his blood run cold. A crude camp had been established in a small clearing at the forest edge. 6 Volkvi warriors moved about the camp, their weapons and armor marking them as the same group that had attacked Ravnholm. At the clearing's center stood a tall wooden post, and bound to it with heavy chains was the unmistakable figure of Bjorn One-Arm. The Berserker was alive but clearly wounded beyond the injuries he'd sustained at Ravnholm. Fresh blood matted his beard and stained the remnants of his tunic. His head hung forward, whether from exhaustion or unconsciousness, Leif couldn't tell from this distance. Around the post, strange symbols had been drawn on the ground with white powder. The Volkvi moved with ceremonial purpose. One warrior, distinguished by elaborate tattoos covering his shaved head, directing the others in what appeared to be ritual preparations. Leif's stomach twisted with understanding. The Volkvi were preparing Bjorn for sacrifice to their dark gods. The one-armed warrior who had slaughtered their priests and destroyed their altars would himself become an offering, his death feeding the powers he had defied. Panic threatened to overwhelm the boy. What could he do against 6 grown warriors? He had a knife, a small bow with limited arrows, and no combat experience. Charging into the camp would achieve nothing except his own capture, giving the Volkvi 2 sacrifices instead of 1. Yet doing nothing meant watching Bjorn die, the man who had saved him, who had honored his father's last request to protect. Ragnar's son at any cost. The man who had fought impossible odds to give Leif a chance at survival. The raven landed on a branch near Leif's hiding place, its dark eyes fixing on the boy with that same unsettling intelligence. It cocked its head, as if considering him, then gave a soft croak that somehow carried an expectant quality. "What would you have me do?" Leif whispered to the bird, to the All-Father it might represent, to the memory of his father, to Bjorn himself. "I'm just a boy. I'm not a warrior yet." The raven's only response was to preen one wing, unconcerned with Leif's crisis of courage. After a moment, it took flight again, circling the boy once before gliding toward the east, away from the Volkvi camp, away from Bjorn. Was this his answer? That some battles couldn't be won? That wisdom lay in recognizing when to retreat? Bjorn himself had told him to flee to the coastal settlement if the Berserker didn't return. Perhaps this was the gods confirming that command. Leif watched the raven disappear into the eastern sky, his heart heavy with the weight of abandoning Bjorn. To his fate, he was about to turn away when movement from the camp caught his attention. The tattooed leader was gesturing dramatically, pointing first to the westering sun, then to Bjorn. One of the warriors nodded and began stoking a large fire at the clearing's edge. The meaning was clear even to Leif's young mind. The sacrifice would happen at sunset, when day gave way to night and the barrier between worlds grew thin. He had only hours, perhaps less, to decide his course. As the boy watched in helpless frustration, a new figure entered the clearing from the opposite side, approaching the Volkvi camp with confident strides. Unlike the other warriors, this newcomer wore robes rather than leather armor, embroidered with the same spiral symbols Leif had seen on the raiders' shields. A priest, perhaps, come to oversee the sacrifice. The warriors greeted the robed figure with deference, the tattooed leader bowing his head slightly as they conversed in their harsh language. The priest moved to Bjorn, grasping the Berserker's hair and yanking his head up to examine his face. Even from a distance, Leif could see Bjorn was conscious, his body tensed at the priest's touch, though he lacked the strength to resist. Something about the priest's movements, the way he held himself, triggered a memory in Leif's mind. He squinted, trying to see more clearly through the gathering shadows of the forest. When the priest turned to survey the ritual preparations, Leif caught a glimpse of his face and understood Bjorn's hatred of the Volkvi in a sudden flash of clarity. The priest had no eyes. Where eyes should have been were only empty sockets, the surrounding skin marked with ritual scars forming the same spiral pattern seen on the warriors' shields. Yet he moved with the confidence of one who could see, gesturing precisely as he directed adjustments to the ritual circle. This was magic of the darkest kind. Sight gained through sacrifice, power purchased with pain. This was what Bjorn had. Discovered 3 winters ago, what had driven him to slaughter a dozen Volkvi priests and destroy their altars. Cold determination replaced Leif's fear. He could not defeat 6 warriors and a dark priest, but perhaps he didn't need to fight them all at once. Perhaps there was another way, a way that required a small boy's stealth rather than a warrior's strength. The raven had disappeared, but Leif no longer needed its guidance. His path was clear, though fraught with danger. He would wait for darkness, when shadows would hide his approach. He would use the skills he'd begun to learn in the forests around his mother's home. How to move silently, how to remain unseen. And he would remember everything Bjorn had taught him in their brief time together. About courage, about doing what must be done, about honoring one's word even at great cost. "Hold on, Bjorn One-Arm," Leif whispered into the gathering dusk. Ragnarson does not abandon his shield brother. Twilight deepened around Leif as he crept closer to the Volkvi camp, using every shadow and tree trunk for cover. The ritual preparations continued unabated, warriors arranging strange artifacts in precise patterns around Bjorn's post. The eyeless priest stood before a small altar of stacked stones, mixing substances in a bone bowl while chanting in that guttural language. Leif had crawled to within 50 paces of the clearing's edge when a sound behind him froze his blood. The snap of a twig, followed by the unmistakable whisper of a blade being drawn from its sheath. Someone had found him. Before he could react, a hand clamped over his mouth, while another arm wrapped around his small chest, pinning his arms. Leif struggled silently, remembering Bjorn's knife at his belt, but unable to reach it. "Be still, little wolf," a woman's voice hissed in his ear, her Norse heavily accented but understandable. "I am not your enemy." The arms relaxed slightly, though the hand remained over his mouth. "I will release you, but you must make no sound. Nod if you understand." Leif nodded once, his heart hammering. True to her word, the stranger released him. He turned slowly to face his captor. She was tall, for a woman, almost as tall as Bjorn, with dark hair braided tightly against her scalp. Her face bore blue tattoos, not the spirals of the Volkvi, but patterns of interlocking knots that marked her as Pictish. She wore leather armor reinforced with small metal plates, its design unlike anything Leif had seen before. At her hip hung a curved sword of foreign make. "You are far from safety, boy," she whispered, her pale eyes scanning the forest around them before returning to his face. "What business have you with the Volkvi?" "They have my friend," Leif answered, matching her whisper. "The one-armed Berserker." The woman's expression changed subtly. "Bjorn One-Arm is your friend? How did a child come to travel with the Blood Wolf?" "He protected me when my father's settlement was destroyed," Leif replied, wondering if he was speaking too freely to this stranger. Yet something in her manner suggested she was no ally of the Volkvi. "Who are you?" "I am Sigrun," she said simply, as if the name should mean something. When Leif's face showed no recognition, she added, "Some call me the Shadow Walker. The Volkvi call me Death." She moved past Leif to study the camp layout, her movements as silent as a hunting cat. 7 warriors, including the tattooed one, plus the eyeless one, she murmured, seemingly to herself. "Too many for a clean extraction." "You're here to rescue Bjorn?" Leif asked, hope rising in his chest. Sigrun gave him a measured look. "I'm here to kill the eyeless one. Bjorn's presence complicates matters." "Please," Leif whispered urgently. "Help him. He saved my life. He fought the Volkvi alone to give me time to escape." "That sounds like the Blood Wolf," Sigrun acknowledged. "Always fighting battles he cannot win." She studied Leif more carefully. "What is your name, boy?" "Leif Ragnarson. Ragnar the Red's son? From the Orkney settlement?" When Leif nodded, surprise flickered across her tattooed features. "I knew your father. A good warrior, honorable in his dealings." She sighed. "Perhaps that is sign enough." "Very well, little Ragnarson. I will help you free Bjorn if possible. But first, we need a diversion." She reached into a pouch at her belt and removed several small objects wrapped in waxed cloth. "Fire arrows," she explained. "When ignited, they burn hot enough to melt metal. I plan to use them on the eyeless one, but plans change." She handed 2 to Leif. "Can you use that bow on your back?" "Yes." Leif replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I can hit a target at 20 paces. Good. When full darkness falls, you will circle to the eastern edge of the clearing. I will position myself to the west. When you see my signal, a fox's cry 3 times, you will light these arrows and fire them at the far side of their camp, aiming for the supply wagons. Then you will run, as fast and as quietly as you can, back the way you came. Head for the river and wait for me there. Do you understand? Leif nodded, his mouth dry with fear and excitement. What will you do? I will free Bjorn while they deal with the fire, Sigrun replied. Or die trying. I want to help, Leif insisted. Bjorn protected me. I should help save him. Sigrun's expression softened slightly. You are brave, little Ragnarson, but you serve Bjorn best by surviving. If we both fall, someone must tell the tale of how he fought. She paused, studying him with those penetrating pale eyes. But if things go wrong, if I cannot reach him, the eyeless one must not be allowed to complete his ritual. The arrows burn hot enough to give even Bjorn a clean death, if freedom is impossible. Better that than what the Volkvi plan for him. The implication hit Leif like a physical blow. She was suggesting he might need to kill Bjorn rather than let him be sacrificed. The thought was horrifying, yet he understood the grim logic behind it. A warrior's death, clean and quick, rather than a drawn-out sacrifice to dark powers. Understand, he said, his voice steadier than he expected. Sigrun nodded approvingly. You are your father's son. Now go. Circle wide to avoid their sentries. Wait for my signal. Darkness had fully descended by the time Leif reached his assigned position. The clearing was illuminated by several torches and a large central fire, casting long shadows that danced with the movements of the Volkvi warriors. The eyeless priest stood before Bjorn, intoning something in that harsh language while drawing symbols on the berserker's chest with dark liquid. Bjorn's head was up now, his face bloody but his eyes alert and defiant. Whatever they had done to him, they hadn't broken his spirit. Leif felt a surge of admiration for the one-armed warrior's unyielding courage. From the western edge of the clearing came the call, a fox's cry, repeated 3 times. The signal. Leif's hands trembled slightly as he prepared the first fire arrow, using the striker from his pack to ignite the specially treated head. The arrow caught quickly, burning with an intense white flame that illuminated the forest around him. Taking careful aim at the supply wagons on the far side of the camp, Leif drew the bow to his cheek and released. The flaming arrow arced high over the clearing, a streak of white fire against the night sky. It landed perfectly, embedding itself in the canvas covering of the nearest wagon. Within seconds, flames began to spread. Leif didn't wait to see more. He knocked the second arrow, lit it, and loosed it at the same target. This time, the arrow landed directly in a stack of barrels beside the wagon. Whatever they contained, it was flammable. The resulting explosion sent warriors diving for cover as fragments of barrel and flaming liquid scattered across the clearing. Chaos erupted in the camp. Warriors shouted in alarm, rushing toward the sea, fire with water skins and blankets to smother the flames. The eyeless priest turned toward the disturbance, his face contorting with rage as he barked orders to the tattooed leader. From the western edge of the clearing, a shadow detached itself from the darkness and moved with incredible speed toward Bjorn's post. Sigrun, taking advantage of the diversion. Leif forced himself to turn away, to flee as instructed, but something made him hesitate. Some instinct that whispered he should stay, that he might still be needed. Crouching behind a fallen log, Leif watched as Sigrun reached Bjorn. She worked quickly, using a small tool to pick the locks on his chains. But the fire was spreading faster than expected, illuminating areas that should have remained in shadow. One of the warriors, turning from the burning wagons, spotted the rescue attempt and shouted a warning. The tattooed leader and 2 others rushed toward the post. Sigrun freed Bjorn's arms just as they arrived, pressing his axe into his hand. Where she had obtained it, Leif couldn't guess. Perhaps she had found it among the Folkvi's trophies. Despite his injuries, Bjorn roared to life at the familiar weight of his weapon, swinging it in a deadly arc that caught the first warrior across the chest. Sigrun engaged the tattooed leader, her curved sword flashing in the firelight as they exchanged blows with blinding speed. The eyeless priest stood apart from the melee, his hands raised as he began a different kind of chant, one that made the air seem to thicken and waver, like heat rising from sun-baked stones. The ground around him darkened, as if shadows were gathering at his command. Leif realized with sudden clarity that this was no ordinary priest. The man was working magic, dark, powerful magic, that could turn the tide against Bjorn and Sigrun despite their warrior skills. Something needed to be done, and quickly. He had one arrow left. Not a fire arrow, just a simple hunting point. But in the right place? Leif knocked the arrow, drawing the bowstring back to his cheek as he'd been taught. The distance was greater than he'd ever attempted, the target smaller and moving. He took a deep breath, steadying his aim, remembering his stepfather's instructions. See where you want the arrow to go, not where it might go wrong. He released on the exhale. The arrow flew true, crossing the clearing in a heartbeat before burying itself in the eyeless priest's throat. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a wet, choking sound. The priest clutched at the shaft protruding. From his neck, dark blood flowing between his fingers as he staggered and fell. The effect on the remaining Volkvi was immediate. They faltered, some crying out in their harsh language as their spiritual leader collapsed. The shadows that had been gathering dispersed like mist in a strong wind. Bjorn and Sigrun pressed their advantage. Within moments, the tattooed leader lay dead at Sigrun's feet, while Bjorn dispatched the last warrior with a powerful swing of his axe. The clearing fell silent, except for the crackling of flames from the burning wagons. Leif remained frozen behind his log, scarcely believing what he had just witnessed and what he had done. He had taken a life, not in close combat as a warrior might, but from a distance, with a bow. Yet the outcome was the same. The eyeless priest was dead, and by his hand. Leif, Bjorn's voice boomed across the clearing. I know you're there, boy. Come out! Reluctantly, Leif emerged from his hiding place, stepping into the firelight. Bjorn stood leaning on his axe, his wounds evident but his stance still powerful. Beside him, Sigrun cleaned her blade on a fallen warrior's cloak, her expression unreadable. I told you to run, she said as Leif approached, though there was no real anger in her voice. I did, Leif replied. But then I came back. Good thing. You did? Bjorn grunted, nodding toward the fallen priest. That was a shot worthy of Ol himself. I didn't think, Leif admitted. I just saw what he was doing and acted. The best warriors often do, Sigrun said, sheathing her sword. Thinking comes later, with the nightmares. There was something in her tone that suggested personal experience. Bjorn lowered himself carefully to sit on a fallen log, his injuries clearly taking their toll now that the immediate danger had passed. How did you find me, boy? I told you to wait at the cave. The raven led me, Leif said simply. Bjorn and Sigrun exchanged a meaningful glance. Odin's bird, Bjorn murmured. The Allfather has his eye on you, it seems. On both of you, Sigrun corrected. This was no chance meeting. The Norns have woven a strange pattern here. She turned to Leif. That priest you killed was no ordinary Volkvi. He was their leader, the one they call the Sight Stealer. Legend says he traded his eyes to dark powers in exchange for visions of the future. A future he didn't see clearly enough, Bjorn said, with grim satisfaction. Or he would have known to fear a child with a bow. He studied Leif with newfound respect. You saved both our lives, Ragnarson. Before Leif could respond, a growl from the forest edge drew everyone's attention. From the darkness emerged a massive wolf, its fur as white as fresh snow, its eyes gleaming with intelligence to rival the ravens. It padded into the clearing, ignoring the burning wagons and the dead warriors, its gaze fixed on Leif. "Gary," Sigrun breathed, using one of the names of Odin's wolves. "Now I understand why the Allfather's bird guided you." The wolf stopped before Leif, its head level with the boy's chest. It regarded him with those disconcertingly intelligent eyes, then turned and looked back the way it had come, as if expecting them to follow. "It seems our journey is not yet over," Bjorn said, rising painfully to his feet. "The gods have plans. For you, Leif Ragnarson. For all of us." "What kind of plans?" Leif asked, both frightened and excited by these supernatural signs. "That," Sigrun replied, gathering what supplies could be salvaged from the camp, "is what we must discover. But one thing is certain. The boy who was brave enough to follow a raven's guidance, skilled enough to slay the eyeless one, and loyal enough to risk his life for a wounded berserker, has proven himself more than just Ragnar's son." She handed him a short sword taken from one of the fallen warriors, its blade cleaned and its size suitable for a child's hand. "You have earned a warrior's weapon, Leif Bloodtaker." The name, his first warrior's title, sent a shiver of pride through Leif. He accepted the sword with the solemnity the moment deserved. "I will strive to be worthy of it." "You already are," Bjorn said, resting his hand on Leif's shoulder. "Now let us follow Odin's wolf and see what destiny awaits us." As they left the burning camp behind, the white wolf leading them deeper into the forest, Leif felt a strange sense of peace despite all they had endured. He had lost his father, his home, and his innocence in the span of 2 days. But he had gained something too, a place in a saga that would one day be told in the great halls of the north, of how the last child of Ravnholm found not just survival, but purpose in the company of a one-armed berserker and a shadow-walking warrior woman. Somewhere above them, invisible in the night sky, a raven circled, watching over the unlikely companions, as they ventured forth to meet whatever fate the gods had woven for them. The threads of destiny had been rewoven, the pattern changed by the courage of a child who refused to abandon his protector, who chose action over fear when faced with overwhelming odds. And in the halls of Valhalla, Ragnar the Red raised his drinking horn in a silent toast to his son, the boy who had proven himself a true Viking when faced with the ultimate test. If this saga of courage, loyalty, and divine intervention has stirred your warrior's spirit, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Our channel brings you the most powerful tales from the Viking Age each week. Stories of berserkers and shield maidens, of gods walking among mortals, and of ordinary people rising to extraordinary challenges. Join our band of modern Vikings as we explore the legends, beliefs, and culture of our northern ancestors. Whether you're drawn to the clash of steel in battle or the whispered wisdom of the skalds, you'll find your place at our hearth. Subscribe now and never miss another adventure in the 9 realms.